All right. As mentioned, I appreciate everybody jumping on. I was mentioning prior to this that I was excited about the opportunity to do this when I started coaching a number of years ago. I obviously utilized a lot of these coaches' corners just to kind of learn drills and or listen to, varsity coaches that had a lot of wisdom. And so appreciate, of course, CWPA letting me share some thoughts and ideas around what I think is important. So happy to be here and hope things that are valuable here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my best to keep myself on track here. As mentioned, sorry. Feel free to come off mute, ask questions. I'll try to catch them if they happen. I'll also save some time at the end if there are questions. But what I'm going to be talking about today is water polo conditioning. From my lens, the way I think about that is really game representative water polo. So making sure that our conditioning ultimately follows the patterns, the rhythm, and the demands of water polo. And so we'll kind of talk through some of that here. Just a quick introduction. I didn't put much on this slide. My name's obviously David Abbott. So I am the coach of the University of Michigan Women's Club Water Polo team. I have been the coach there for 12 years now. So started when I was a bit younger, and I've had the opportunity to be a part of the program for a number of years, and have kind of had an opportunity to shape the program into obviously what I see as a good program, and with that comes obviously a lot of focus on conditioning. So that's what we're going to talk about here today. Why conditioning matters to me. So I'm going to give a little bit of a philosophy kind of outline here in the beginning, and then I will go through some actual plays. I have some videos, so stay engaged. It does get better, I promise. But when I think about why conditioning matters, I think it's actually for me a lot more than obviously just fitness. So conditioning really is what I would consider probably one of the biggest tools we have as coaches to shape the culture of a team. I think it reflects, as I mentioned, the real demands of water polo. So the sport is obviously fast, it's physical, it requires constant effort, right? And when conditioning is built into practice, I think the right way, it can actually make training not only more competitive, but more fun, right? A lot of us have played this sport, and we know that being in shape makes the sport more fun. That's what I always tell my team is we gotta work through the conditioning to have more fun. Because obviously players, right, are constantly engaged and challenged when you're making it more competitive and fun. And so conditioning is a big piece of that. I think it also creates an opportunity for athletes to really develop self-awareness. So they start to understand how obviously their effort, their preparation, right, their mindset and impact, how that kind of impacts, their performance. And so over time, that helps the athletes push themselves and truly take ownership of their development, which is a huge part, right, of conditioning. You're not going to force someone to do it. So them having that self-awareness of the importance of it and the benefits of it is a huge part of obviously conditioning. So for me, kind of as it says there, right, conditioning isn't just about getting an athlete tired. I think that conditioning is about building the habits and the mindset that ultimately are going to show up in the game when it's on the line and when it's most important. Moving forward here, just calling out a little bit around traditional conditioning. So I think we can all agree, right? There is a place for swim sets. There's a place for, just a generic leg set or generic intervals. And there's a place for, conditioning outside the water and everywhere else. I think today my focus is really hopefully to drive home that point of making your conditioning game focused and also incorporating it into your practice. So from my lens, traditionally a lot of conditioning, as I said, in water polo is looked at something like this column to the left here, right? Long swims, generic intervals. It kind of exists as you would separate from the game itself. And of course, players might swim hundreds and thousands of yards in a season, and they definitely will get tired, right? And that will definitely benefit them. But the question is whether, in my mind, is if that fatigue actually prepares them for what the sport demands. So what I keep kind of going back to there. And so, when we look at what water polo actually requires here, is kind of indicated in this middle column. It obviously looks different, right? The game is short, explosive efforts. It's sprinting. It's wrestling for position. It's reacting to transitions. At the same time, right, those players are needing to make constant decisions, right? Often under chaos, under pressure, and are really dealing with physical contact the entire time, right? And so what often happens is the players become fit, right? They are fit. And I always kind of joke with my wife, I'm like, they're getting in shape, but they don't necessarily become better at playing water polo when they're tired, which is really the key, right? And that's to me, I think where I would say games are decided. So my conditioning philosophy, you've probably caught on to what that may entail. But for me, right, when I think about the season ahead, I think about getting my team in shape. Of course, we have really difficult weeks where we focus on conditioning or we choose a day. But overall, my approach is game representative. Right, I want to make sure I'm thinking about it in terms of how is this reflected in a game. Right, passing face to face, is that always the exact way that a game is represented? I'm hoping it's decision based, right? Especially when they're tired, physically demanding, which is obviously important, mentally demanding, and then competitive and fun. I think the key there is it still needs to find ways to be fun. And so a lot of what I try to pour into my conditioning is doing it a little bit different or adding elements to it, which I'll talk about in a minute, but making it so it's not just the same old swim set or leg set, and kind of losing people's excitement. So again, kind of closing each slide with a statement, conditioning, again, from my perspective, my philosophy, should mirror the physical demands, decision making, and chaos of real play. So 3 types of conditioning that I would say are out there and that I think are important to train to. So obviously one is physical conditioning, right? That's speed, that's power, that's endurance. I think that's what a lot of us are very familiar with. I think there's cognitive conditioning, so that decision making under fatigue. We still need to make sure we are conditioning our teams to be able to do that. And then there's emotional and competitive conditioning. And I know emotional, kind of maybe is a little bit different, but to me, it comes back to conditioning your team to have composure, right? Resilience, building trust with each other, conditioning them in communication, which, I'm sure everybody on this call that's a coach constantly is saying, communicate, communicate, communicate. And then that pressure tolerance, right? And so a lot of, for me, when I think about conditioning, it's really in these 3 buckets. And when I design or try to look up or ask other coaches about plays or drills or different things to do in practice, it's kind of in these 3 buckets. So again, I think most conditioning is done in that first category. I think the best ones are done really, really in all 3. And then last kind of couple slides here before I get into some actual plays. I think once we move past, right, traditional conditioning, the question becomes, and I think we talked about this already a little bit, but what does the game actually demand for athletes? So I live in a tech world in my normal job, my day-to-day job. And so I'm a analytics person, not necessarily in the game every day, but I think analytics can play into framing up how we think about conditioning. And so if we look at the analytics here, right, players typically are swimming between 500, 1,800 meters, yards during a game, right? But I think that distance alone obviously doesn't necessarily tell the full story. And so that's part of what I try to think about when I think about swim sets or I think about amount of swimming. Obviously, you want to go beyond that sometimes, but I think, also trying to think about beyond that, what are athletes doing in the water, right? And so, players, at least according to some analytics, are actually in a vertical position, right? Somewhere between kind of that 50 and 70% of the game. So if we think about, right, individuals egg beatering, again, wrestling for position, holding space, reacting to things defensively, it's sometimes fascinating to think that horizontal swimming only makes up about 30 to 50%. And so for some of you, you may be like, yeah, David, that is definitely how it is. But I think for me, when I realized that, I think it changed my perspective of conditioning a little bit in terms of the swimming, the speed, the power, all of that really matters. But when we think about where the percentage of the game is played, there's so much that matters in the rest of your core and your shoulders and really being able to stack that posture. But so again, as I've said before, even those numbers don't fully capture, right, how the game feels. I keep saying this, but players are constantly altering kind of between different physical, cognitive demands. Like I said, and it's reflected there, right? They're sprinting, they're tussling with each other, they're shooting, they're defending, they're making decisions, then they're recovering, right? And then it happens again. And so the rhythm of the game tends to look really like these short bursts of high intensity, maybe 5, 15 seconds, followed by really those kind of 10 to 20-second partial recovery. And so again, it's that repetitive next effort that happens. And so because of that, again, conditioning shouldn't just train the distance, right? Like I said, hundreds of thousands of yards isn't what I would consider the ideal conditioning. I think it should mimic kind of that rhythm of what we're talking about here in the analytics. So when I or we maybe start designing, conditioning drills, I think the goal is really to recreate that rhythm, those short explosive actions, quick recovery, and really the constant decision making. So when I think about conditioning, when I think about a drill, I've obviously gone through what do I consider, but I kind of ask myself these questions. So I don't know if these would be helpful for you, but I ask myself, does it look like a game? Does it require decisions to be made? Does it include pressure, right? Is there a pressure moment in there, whether it's, you're doing something that's affecting your teammate, you're against a shot clock, there's points involved, it's competitive, whatever it may be. Does it include competition, right? So it kind of goes back to that point system or that, creating it to be fun. And does the fatigue affect execution? I think that one's really, really key. So I think all of us would agree that as we get tired, our shooting form drops, right? Or our passing drops or our mental drops. And so really does that fatigue affect execution? And so if yes, right, if our drills reflect this, then I would consider it good conditioning. So I'm going to go through here a couple of things around conditioning drill examples. I'm going to go through a swim set alternative. A lot of you have probably seen these, but just kind of giving you some insights into some of the things we consider. There's obviously, I could spend a long time talking about this and sharing different drills, but these are the things that I put our team through. So some swim sets, some hidden conditioning, some passing conditioning, shooting conditioning, and then kind of communication and resilience. Before I move into that, is there any questions? I know I'm moving kind of quick here, but I also want to make sure I can get through everything I have. If there is silence, I will continue to move. All right, perfect. So first conditioning example I have, just wanted to share kind of a polo/game swim set. So again, this is an example of, we could obviously have a swim set that is a normal swim turn, or, the use of walls, or we keep those lane lines in. I will often with our team remove lane lines and do swim sets, which they really don't like, but we obviously don't play with lane lines. We will do swim sets such as reflected here. So this was just an example I thought is a good one if someone's looking for something different to try. It does not include the walls, right? All these things are starting at the 2-meter line. And then as you read through kind of down this line, what you'll see is a lot of direction change, right? You'll see a lot of body position transitions. You'll see a lot of egg beatering under fatigue, and you'll see a lot of head up swimming. And so again, this is kind of a combination of what you would simulate in a game, right? Swimming forward, head up, at the 7-meter line, you're egg beatering transition with one arm straight out of the water, and then you're doing that to finish each lap, right? The next one, you're facing backwards, and then you're head up swimming to half, 3 vertical lunges, head up finish each lap, right? And so you're forcing them to stop, you're forcing them to get vertical, you're forcing them back down, right? Which plays into obviously shooting, it plays into passing, it plays into, transitioning for a counter. And so these different things are not only, I think, a good workout, right? There's a series of kind of, like I said, all the different things at the bottom there, but it's also different, right? It's not just saying, hey, go swim, 10 100s on the 120 or whatever it may be. And so it is also mentally stimulating for them to have to think through it differently, and really perform a bit of a different set. So I threw this out there. I think, like I said, it would be a good one to maybe try. Tried to include some of the timing that we use it with, but obviously adjust that as needed. And I think it's fun to be able to play with maybe the different skills that you can do in the in-between moments here with the swim set. The other example of an alternative, this is a mainstay at our practice. If you talk to any of our teammates or our players, they will tell you we do this typically every Monday. I call this Lighthouse. And so I tried to draw it out here. I apologize. I didn't have a good way to represent it. But ultimately, right, you have one player that is doing shuttle runs. So they're swimming heads up with a ball really from first comb back, second comb back, third comb back, fourth comb back. Right. So a lot of head up swimming. They're really obviously building that neck strength, that shoulder strength, the core, the legs to be able to swim heads up fast with the ball. And then you have an athlete on the wall who is standing up actually on the deck. They are passing a ball to the athlete in the water. So it's a constant pass back and forth. Right. And this is what we would call our classic lighthouse. And so each athlete would be rotating through each of these positions, right? So you have the swimming that's occurring, which is working on that head up swim. You have the in water receiving of the ball with two hands and passing it back, which is obviously working on egg beater, hand-eye coordination. And then you have the individual on the actual wall that is in theory recovering, but they're also right, they're controlling the demand that they're putting on the athlete in the water. So they're building that relationship with their teammate. They're either intensifying it by speeding up, or maybe they're slowing it down. But that's kind of the recovery. So again, the swim, the legs, the rest. I typically will have them go through each of these positions 3 times. The other thing that's really nice about this drill is if you have a skill you're trying to work. So I kind of indicated it down here. But it allows you to change the skills that you're doing. So we will, with the individual with the ball, instead of them swimming with a ball, we'll have them do spider, right? So they were spider, or drift, and do kind of the same motions, but it's again working on that specific skill set. They might do something different than that, just kind of depending. You may have them just egg beater forward, out, and then back and out and back. You can do the same thing with the 2 individuals on the wall, right? So we'll have them do defensive closeouts. So we'll have somebody that's just standing in good offensive position. The other individual's working on closing out, crashing back, closing out, crashing back. And they're doing that for the extent of the time that the individual's doing the other skill. And so it's a really nice way to incorporate new skills, different skills, things you're trying to emphasize while making sure that everybody is continuing to work hard. Additionally, like I said, it is different, right? It's a change of pace. It's a good thing to do outside of the kind of standard swim set. So as I move forward here, hidden conditioning, I think you've probably gathered this throughout at least the portions that I've already talked a little bit about. But for me, hidden conditioning, as it kind of states here, is that physical and mental workload players accumulate during normal drills, right? When intensity and expectations are designed correctly. So intensity for me is key, right? Keeping intensity in everything that we do. So that is, and I'll kind of show it here in a minute, but that is kind of those in-between moments, right? Keeping transitions quick, keeping them moving, not allowing a lot of downtime, right? And so I always am trying to find drills, and this is maybe letting the cat out of the bag, but I think my team knows that they maybe don't realize they are conditioning. So they're probably shaking their heads, but they just feel like they're playing water polo, right? So what are the drills that we can have them do? I say, hey, we're not doing a swim set today. Well, I'll show the drill that we often do. We're going to do this drill. And in theory, they're still doing a swim set, right? It's just in a different form. So kind of finding those moments of hidden conditioning, I think, are really key. And so again, when I talk about hidden conditioning, there's kind of the traditional drill. There's the hidden conditioning version, right? Sometimes we'll just kind of do the pass and wait for the ball, pass and wait for the ball. Change that to pass, have somebody move, pass, have somebody move, right? That adds that element of conditioning to that otherwise standing still and passing. When explaining things, instead of people just standing there and sitting and watching you, have them egg beater, right? Have the rest of something be egg beatering. Rather than static shooting, right? Just waiting in line, have them shoot and sprint, have them shoot and sprint, right? So adding elements into what you're doing simply to make it a little bit more intense and have higher conditioning throughout a practice. So as it kind of states here, as you look at or you start looking for those moments of hidden conditioning, I think you realize that they're all over. And as you think about elevating the intensity, you realize that you're doing a ton of conditioning, even if it's not traditional, even if it's not, hey, a swim set, a leg set, land exercise, etc. So a couple of things we do. So one is passing conditioning. Of course, there is a time and place for breaking down passing and working on wrists and forearms and shoulders and core and proper and very focused one-on-one passing. This by no means is something we do all the time, but this is something that we add in when we're trying to kind of build in conditioning and passing. And so the first one here I gave an example of is what we just call kind of movement passing. High intensity, kind of game specific. You have one or two people. They're working on moving in space. So you can see you have a passer. They are constantly moving to the second person who is swimming back and forth, then back and forth, then back and forth, right? And so they're working on getting that ball out of the water and getting it back up. We will do this wet and dry, right? So dry, we're working on our hips following. Wet, we're working on obviously getting that and getting that back. I mentioned you can do this with a third athlete involved. They are just a defender that is mirroring that individual at the two, right? So they're mirroring that person going back and forth. You can also do this forward and back, which I'll show in a minute. Second one, which is maybe a little bit different, is we do windmill passing. So you have a middle line that is moving up and they're kind of doing that short passing while they're rotating out the outside. This does a couple of things. I think number one is obviously there's constant movement. A lot of times in water polo, we're not sitting still, right? So there's constant movement while they're passing. They are passing when they're on the outside over the middle athletes. So I talk about also conditioning trust, right? This is part of that, trusting that you're not going to hit your athlete. And so that really comes into play when we switch to using our weak arms and they're expected to still make that pass over their teammates. And so you got to build that trust as well as that pressure of, am I going to get hit while I'm passing, right? So you're trying to focus on the passing, and I'm not recommending you have your athletes get hit by the ball, but ultimately it is conditioning for them for that as well. So kind of that pressure situation. So I just threw two videos in here quickly. I won't spend forever because I know we're coming up on time, but the one on the left is showing kind of that back and forth swimming that occurs. That was, of course, not a great pass, but it is that pass with a mirroring defender that is happening there. So they're mirroring them. And then this one is a forward and back passing. So they're swimming at them. Defenders working on obviously feathering away. And then we're doing the back door, right? Defender working on high hands. And so it's constant movement. It's constant passing. We do it for a minute on and then we rotate. And so everybody's rotating through and doing that. The other drill that we do kind of for some hidden conditioning is called double hernia. I know in water polo, we all love to name different things, a lot of different things. So maybe you have something for this. But this is really one of those that I will tell our team, we're not doing a swim set. Instead, we're going to do counter. We're going to do constant counter. We're going to do double hernia. And so it is really the goal of a one-on nobody, right, with a defender trailing. And then you are trying to take that shot. Once you get to the other side, you are switching offense and defense and coming back. So again, a lot of swimming. There is the pressure of someone that's, bearing down on you to steal that ball. You're trying to focus on where are you going to shoot. There's a goalie in front of me. And then you're working on ultimately that transition from an offensive possession directly to a defensive possession. And so again, an opportunity to force them to kind of do this continuously, which is a good change of pace for a drill, for swimming. And if you have them do it long enough, it's exhausting. It is definitely exhausting. And so something that I would highly encourage to incorporate. And then the other area is shooting. Probably everybody has some form of this. We do a lot of tired shooting. So I talk about making sure that we can perform different skills while tired. One of those is shooting. We lose a lot of obviously our positioning in the water, our proper form when we're tired. the care to aim, the care to elevate, the posture, laying on our back, etc. It also is an opportunity for the passers to work on. If you're not passing well, you still need to stay engaged. The shooting doesn't matter. So I won't go through these super intense, but the one to the left is really a movement shooting, and then you're pressed down on by somebody and taking 5 shots. The one in the middle we call around the world. So you're doing 5 actual pops, and then you're doing 5 shots, right? And so it's a lot of pops, a lot of shots. You're pretty exhausted by the end of it. You're also getting to work each position. Also a great thing for your goalies, right? We don't want to forget about them. And so great opportunity for them to work on somebody shooting from every position in the pool. And then the last one is kind of doing that lateral movement. So 2 athletes together, they're swimming between the 2 and the 4. They're receiving a ball, taking a shot, receiving a ball, taking a shot, and then they're moving again to the 2 and the 4. The idea behind this is that they are trying to combine score 10 goals. Until they score 10 goals, they are not done. And so again, is that element of self motivation. The goalie is working extremely hard in this one. It's working on your hips following and elevating, your hips following and elevating, and is pretty exhausting. So quick videos of those. We have the pops one here, of kind of those 5 pops in a row, as you can see. She's at the 3 and then taking those 5 shots in a row. So dropping the elbow a little bit there, but that's kind of what we're working on, right? Is trying to make sure that we keep that continuous pressure on her to make sure she's comfortable with the short burst of the pops followed by the short shots, right? And then the other one here is kind of the lateral movement. So there's a shot there on the goalie. We move from the 2 and the 4, right? Individual receiving 1, which again, only as good as the pass, not a good pass. The other one's receiving, shooting, laying on their back. And so ultimately that is what we're trying to work on is posture. We're trying to work on transition between the 2, but a great way to get your team exhausted. And then kind of the last couple of slides I have here is the piece around, I haven't really mentioned this, is cognitive and emotional conditioning. So there's things that I believe, you may think I'm a little bit crazy, but that I think are good for the team to do. So we'll do things around silent scrimmages. So condition the importance of obviously communication, right? When you take it away, it's pretty amazing how quickly they realize the importance of that. The awareness of nonverbal cues with your athletes or your teammates, sorry. So when are they indicating they want the ball? Maybe they're not calling for it. How do they show you where they want the ball without calling for it? And then again, you have to stay mentally checked in. So it's easy to be tired. It's easy to be kind of lost in the game or watch the game. But this obviously requires you to be checked in and paying attention. We'll do things like riddle leg sets. So I added one here if you want to look it up, but it's a wolf, goat, and cabbage leg set. This is a bit of our team is always laughing when we do this, but the idea is that you have this riddle. Each object correlates to the riddle, right? So it might be a weight ball, it might be a weight belt. I like to use inanimate objects like chairs and different things, but they are forced to ultimately solve the riddle, which leads to their leg set. And so again, sounds a little bit strange, but it forces obviously team collaboration, communication. It forces trust. If someone says, "Hey, I think I solved it," it forces you to say, "Yeah, I think you're right," or not. If they're wrong, believe it or not, it makes the leg set that much worse. And so it's fun to see them mentally stimulated while they're working hard. They're making those decisions under pressure, and they're trying to win, right? And so we have multiple of them going at once. And the last one, I think, is just alternating the anticipated practice rhythm or environment. So, for us, it's sometimes practicing in a different way in the pool, so they're not always shooting with the same background. They get thrown off a little bit when I'm like, we're going over there to practice. It may be doing the swim set at the end of practice, which they really love. I ended practice the other day with, doing lighthouse at the end. There was a lot of frustration with that, but ultimately, at that point, they're tired, they're exhausted, similar to a game. And so it builds kind of that resilience with them and their opportunity to say either I'm going to work hard and end the way I want to end, or they can choose to kind of throw the towel in, which again is where you start to build the culture of your team. So last slide here, and then I'll be done, is, I think from my lens, conditioning should never feel like something separate from the game. I think the best conditioning looks, feels, and ultimately demands exactly what the game demands. So that is all I have. I appreciate you guys listening there. Hopefully something was of value there, but I appreciate you guys joining and taking a minute to listen. Are there any questions? I guess I should open it up for that.
How often do you, or how intense are you? Is every practice just as intense as the day before? Do you spread it out? Does it just depend on your mood?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it depends on the point in the season. I think depends on what was the weekend before, right? Did we have a tournament? Did we not? I'm probably known for if we have a tournament that following Monday, we're working harder than we did, hopefully over the weekend. And so I think it's knowing your team, right? It's reading your team. It's understanding where are they at? Do they need a rest day? Do they not? So we try to keep every practice as intense as possible. And we try to incorporate conditioning in that form in every single practice. But as I indicated, there's obviously time where you need to slow down, you need to stop, you need to work on specific skills, you need to draw out plays, right? So there are those in between moments where it's not as intense, but I would say we either pick a day specifically where we're heavy conditioning, or we try to incorporate 4 days a week in our practices.
Do you have an example of a riddle that you've given your team?
Yeah, so that one I put in there, the cabbage, the wolf, and the goat, look it up. It is a pretty common riddle, but I would recommend you use that riddle. So it is a riddle that actually involves a boat, and the idea is that the wolf will eat the goat will eat the cabbage. You need to move everything from one side to the other. You can't leave, right, the goat with the cabbage. You can't leave the wolf with the goat. So how do you execute that riddle? And how do you get everything to the other side when you can only move one at a time? So that's where I was saying, right, we would assign a weight ball to the goat, we'd assign a chair to the wolf, and we'd assign something else to the other one. And so if they do it wrong, they end up having to move things back and forth multiple times. So take a look at that riddle. It's out there. It's a good one for a leg set.
Thank you.
I don't know if we went over this, but would you recommend the goalie to be ready to swim the same distances, like the 1800 meters, or would you recommend other types of conditioning that?
So for a goalie, I think there is a time where being a part of swim sets are important, right? I think for everybody, cardiovascular matters, right? So making sure that they have that endurance matters. But for us, we will often have our goalies do specific sets on their own. So they'll do from different forms of conditioning. There's always some element of swimming that's involved in that, but definitely not 1800. But they will do some form of probably often sprint swimming. And then they will be incorporating obviously heavy legs. They'll be working on lunges. They'll be working on, just movement in terms of goal positioning. They'll be doing a lot of Broncos, which is, building that shoulder and arm strength. So, I think goalie conditioning is definitely a different breed, but I think that swimming for the sake of swimming is not important for a goalie. But there's a lot of good goalie sets out there that still incorporate swimming. So I would say involvement. And then I do think, right, I will just mention this. Goalies can be isolated sometimes if you do a lot of conditioning because it may not be relevant to them. So finding ways to incorporate your goalies in your conditioning sets. So as I mentioned with the lighthouse conditioning, we will have three of our goalies do that together, but they will just alter the different things to be goalie specific. And so what I mean by that is they'll do lunges down the pool, right, rather than swimming. Or they will do, buckets or jugs. But so they're still a part of the team. They're still involved in what we're doing. They're still getting to interact with their teammates, but they're still doing goalie specific things. So we want to make sure they don't feel isolated to just lift some jugs in the corner.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.